So welcome to this interactive webinar today. We're going to be talking about 10 things that shift in a crisis. Now, it can be applicable across the board for a variety of different contexts, but we're also going to talk about it specific to how it's relevant in this moment. Hopefully it's helpful sort of grounding and resourcing to be able to understand ourselves as we're experiencing and living into this moment, and then also just sort of the world around us and how everyone's navigating it in a different way in this moment in time. So if you want to just get comfortable where you are, again, we'll start with a grounding practice again. We're going to begin, for those of you that joined last time, with a little deep breathing. Again, this moment in time that we're in is very centered around breath, around thinking about our breathing, around focusing in and wondering how we're breathing on any given day. And also this seeking of deep breath to be able to center us and de-stress us. So wherever you are, just get comfortable in your chair and relax into the space wherever you're sitting. And then bring your attention and your focus in on your breath. Just paying attention to the rhythm and the pace of your breathing. Noticing the length of your inhales and the length of your exhales. Noticing how breath moves in and out of your lungs. And then as you're ready, begin to lengthen your breath so that on your inhale, you'll breathe in a little bit more deeply, a little bit more completely. Imagine filling your lungs up with air like a balloon. And on every exhale, releasing the oxygen from your lungs. Imagine pulling your belly in towards your spine, letting all the air go. On your inhale, imagine breathing in deeply and filling your lungs up with air like a balloon, feeling that expansion in the center of your body as it fills with oxygen. And on your exhale, releasing and letting go of that air, pulling your belly in towards your spine so that you can wring out all the oxygen and let it go. Continue your own slow and steady rhythm of breath, particular to you, whatever that looks like in this moment. Make it comfortable for a rhythm and pace that suits you, but really bring your attention and intention in on slowing down that breath. Breath can be the core of our body and then into our minds to remind us to settle, to ground, to center where we are right now. And then as you continue that slow and steady rhythm of breath, just take a moment and scan down your body from your head all the way down to your toes. Noticing those places particular to you where you might hold tension or stress, where your muscles might be tight or sore. Allowing yourself to just become aware of what's showing up in your body in this moment. Our bodies hold the stress of our feelings, of our thoughts, of our whole being. And sometimes they get locked up in pockets and spaces of our body. So notice places like your jawline, even your cheekbones. Notice your neck into your shoulders, just becoming aware of any tension that might be there. Noticing down your arms to your hands and your fingers, through your legs, down into your feet and your toes. Just beginning to pay attention to the roadmap of your own body and noticing what it's holding on to right now. And then on our next inhalation breath in, breathe in and imagine breathing in oxygen to those places of tension and stress in the muscles of your body, feeling them expand even just a little bit. And when you exhale, take a deep sigh out and imagine releasing even just a little of that tension from the muscles of your body. And then take another big, deep breath in, breathing oxygen into those pockets of tension and stress in your muscles. And when you exhale, another deep sigh out, releasing the oxygen, releasing even just a little bit of the tension for this moment. One more big, deep breath in, breathing into the muscles of your body, into those places of tension. And exhale, deep sigh out. Letting go whatever you can and acknowledging whatever remains. Allowing your body just to settle back in that slow and steady rhythm of breath. Knowing that it can be an anchor to ground you throughout our time together, throughout the remainder of your day, throughout your week ahead. That even that simple practice of just checking in with yourself, slowing down and paying attention can help us to ground and relax. And then as you're ready, bring some energy back into the muscles of your body, maybe wiggling your fingers and your toes, maybe shaking your head gently from side to side, if that's comfortable for you. And then as you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes. All right. So welcome back. Thank you for joining me, those of you that are here tonight. I know I had to relocate this from Monday. I was feeling a little under the weather. And, as we're going to talk about these things that shift in times of stress and crisis, I'm personally trying to do a practice of listening more intentionally to my body, right? We're all paying more attention to our health and our wellness day to day. But I'm also trying to practice what I preach as far as being attentive if I'm not at my full capacity, to be lenient with myself. And I think that's also something that is a piece we can carry with us in this moment. It's interesting, I've seen a bunch of articles floating around that are talking a lot about a sort of compulsion or pressure to be overproductive in this moment, that somehow being home, we should actually be getting so much more done. And I think allowing ourselves to let go and have those moments of rest and not feel like we have a pressure to meet some kind of standard. In some ways, that's a very unfortunate side effect of the sort of American ethic. There's positive sides, and then there's pieces of it that can push us too hard. The fact that we're having all these articles circulating about the fact that we're trying to produce too much as people are in isolation says a lot about the sort of cultural compulsion that we've been sort of indoctrinated with to do that to ourselves. And also why it's important to pay attention to these things that are shifting in us and in our family systems and in our communities in these moments of crisis and stress, because as we go through them, it will also speak to why it's so important for us to slow down. So I'm going to move through these. We'll have moments to kind of reflect on each one as we go. And if you have something you want to say, you can, once I get sort of talk generally about a particular concept, I'll open it up. You can also type things in the chat as we go, or you can speak up as we go through the rhythm one to the next. And I saw you said, Quentin, you can't put your video on. That's no problem. Just you do whatever works for you to have the best connection you need. So I'm going to post up again just for a moment, share the image I created. And this is something perhaps my mind was racing and trying to be too productive at the middle of the night when I was trying to go to sleep sometime last week. But I started thinking about all these particular things that change for us when we're in moments of crisis, and particularly in moments of crisis like this, where it's not an isolated incident. Now, some of these can be true for us if we experience an isolated experience of crisis or traumatic stress, like a plane crash or a car accident or a singular incident. But it's also much more pronounced, and they show up more severely or more obviously when we have experiences like this, where the crisis is something that's longer term. And so it actually kind of creates a new rhythm of the way that we are. So I think it's important for us to just, and by no means is this list exhaustive to every single thing, but it's just sort of an overview of some of the common things that shift. And as I've been noticing people on social media noting some of these or being confused by why something's happening, it also felt important to note these are things that happen, and they're probably happening to a lot of us, if not all of us, in some way, shape, or form. And to use the word normalize, but the word normal isn't very effective, because normal is something that changes based on our circumstances. So what is natural in this moment isn't the way that our world naturally worked 3 months ago. And so that shift also is changing. So I just want to go, I'm going to go through each one of them. First, I'm just going to name them. These are not in a particular order of importance necessarily, but they do, some of them build on some of the ones before them. So number 1, perspective. Number 2, change in our expected reality. Number 3, levels of feelings. Number 4, memories and dreams. Number 5, stress levels. Number 6, energy. Number 7, physical sensitivity. Number 8, experience of time. Number 9, sleep cycles. And number 10, appreciation. So we're going to start by talking about perspective. And again, for those folks that were on or watched afterwards, the video I did last week, which is on trauma and grounding in a pandemic, I talked somewhat extensively about this idea of perspective. And this goes back to this idea that the way that we saw the world before, or the reality that we were living into, gave us a kind of way, a kind of worldview. And that worldview and the way that we experience the world has shifted. And some of that can have positive attributes, right? So perspective can also lead to number 10, which is appreciation, or it can lead to things like being more intentional about being aware of our bodies and taking care of ourselves. It can lead to intentionally celebrating, things like that. One of the things that seems to have really gone totally viral and has been so amazing is these club quarantine dance parties. So D Nice, who's a DJ, I think he's based out of New York, started these massive Instagram live dance parties where essentially he DJs parties and thousands of people show up. And it just was an idea that he had. I'm just going to mix some music and go on my Instagram live. And then thousands and thousands of people showed up. So this change in perspective where something that may have not seemed important, or that we might not have valued in the same way, or that we might not have set time aside to do, can all of a sudden become an essential experience. So a lot of people, the reason I even know that was happening is because all these people in my Facebook were posting, Club Quarantine gave me life, Club Quarantine made me feel so amazing. There were all these ways in which people are being so deeply enriched by something that potentially we could take for granted, or not show up for, or not make the time for, in a different world experience. And in the uniqueness of this particular moment with COVID-19, and many, many people, not everyone everywhere, but many people being sheltering in place, or some version of being more sort of cloistered into our physical landscape, there is a change also in how we look at the world, how big our world is, how we make our world bigger, right? Something like an Instagram live dance party allows us to dance and be in community when otherwise we could be isolated. But at the same time, the other side of that perspective is also can come around ideas of fear, built on ideas of fear, ideas of anxiety. It can lead to compulsions. It can lead to hoarding behaviors. So we see some of that in the ways that people have been over preparing. Well, we won't say over preparing. I don't want to say it that way, because I don't want to minimize the necessity for preparation when we don't know when we can get our next groceries, for sure. Some of those things have changed. There are a real change in our reality, but the extent to which people, we'll talk about hydroxychloroquine, right? That was the medication that was announced that might have some efficacy for treating COVID-19. No certainty about that. We don't know that. But the fear of the moment changes our perspective, and it changes our reactions and our responses. So all of a sudden that drug was disappearing, off of shelves, the same way paper towels were, the same way toilet paper was, because of this sense of urgency of, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get what I need. I don't know if I'm going to get my basic needs met. And so I need to over prepare in this moment, because I actually don't know. There's no certainty. We'll get into that a little bit when we talk about number 2, the change in our perceived reality. But I actually don't know anymore. These things that I thought I could rely on that feel really basic, I don't know anymore. So that change in perspective can also change our actions and our reactions, things that we wouldn't normally necessarily do before. And as a result, so the reactionary effect of that are people that have lupus and people that have psoriatic arthritis that require a medication to survive. This shift in communal perspective has changed the access for those people to drugs that they need to survive because of everyone else, because of this anxiety that is real, that is genuine, that is based in fact, and is based on this uncertainty that is also really real and really we're all living into. But that change in perspective can also change the way that we live in the world. Another example of that is we're all hyper clean now, right? We're hyper cleaners. We're cleaning our surfaces. We're washing our hands. What is it? 3 times through the happy birthday song is apparently the expected reality, which I never did before, 3 weeks ago. And the sort of social scientist in me thinks about what is also the impact on that change in perspective, which also changes how we react to the world, say another 3 months from now or 4 months from now. It also changes the way that we experience the world around us, that change in perspective. So a fear of germs that never was quite as intense for any of us as it is in this moment, could actually change our behaviors also moving forward. So part of understanding how our perspective changes, both the things that we celebrate and lift up and the things that we might get stuck on, it's important to notice the things that we might get stuck on, like hyper cleaning, which we need to do now, but also paying attention to, is it becoming a compulsion? Is it becoming something I feel like I can't stop doing and I get really, really anxious if I'm not doing it and I'm thinking about it all the time, right? There's a threshold where it goes beyond a point where it's actually healthy for us anymore. And potentially, much like people who have been through other major crises, it can sort of change our sort of perspective and our behaviors around the world around us, not just in this moment, but potentially moving forward. And some of that is about the new natural state of what we're living in and the new natural state of our own experience. And some of that is just to pay attention to, are we feeling like my anxiety is overwhelming me about being clean? Am I feeling like my anxiety is overwhelming me about, do I have enough food? It's the balance of living into the reality, but not being overwhelmed by it. So I want to see, are there any thoughts, questions, reflections on perspective?
For me, the family system that I'm living in impacts this too, because if one person's perspective, for example, I'm married to a healthcare professional, is obviously she's carrying a different daily burden than I am, and brings that home, and should be able to, right? And then how do we become a team together in that effort, like dealing with her clothing and things at the end of the day so that it's not contaminating the house, but also just time to decompress and process the stress of the day. And how do we do that in a mutual way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and that speaks very much to a real, again, going a little bit into number 2, a change in reality, right? A change in reality for all of us, but she also has a higher level of caution about safety and protection because of the level of potential exposure she's having every day. And so that changes the household, it changes the rhythms of life and the rituals, right? So the ritual becoming now, let's get all the decontaminated clothing and get it right in the washing machine. But the other piece of what you say, I think, is the balance that can help us to not be overcome by it completely, or even those moments, right? She might be exhausted. You might both be overwhelmed, and we'll talk about stress and sleep a little bit later, but having those moments where you, like you said, you can pause, you can process, or you can just sit with each other in a space that doesn't have to be consumed with all of the concerns that are, again, real, but finding a way to balance it even in this sort of state of being. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else on perspective? So feel free to introduce yourself if you want in the chat, your name, your location, and your pronouns if you like. I'm going to move on to number 2. I'm going to move on to number 2, which is, hi Jade, welcome. So number 2 is a change in our reality, the reality that we're living into. And again, I spoke some our expected reality. I spoke some about this also in the first webinar last week, but this idea that, a little bit thinking about some of the examples I gave in perspective, is the expected reality a month ago was that I can easily go to the grocery store. I can touch anything I need to. I can find the exact kind of bread that I want, right? If I want seedless rye, there's almost no place I can't go into that I can find this very particular thing that I want. And that's just an assumed component of my reality. That I can walk down the street and go down the block to the L train. I'm in Chicago, that I can get on, that I can touch all the surfaces, you know, that I can sit in a chair seat next to somebody else on the train. And that's my reality with no negative outcome, just from the basics of how I live my life. And this is one that has a major impact on a lot of the other pieces that shift in stress that we'll talk about later, these sort of feelings, sleep, stress, is there's a way in which we have an expectation of the world, an expectation for the world to meet our needs, whether we know it or not, whatever our baseline is. And our baselines might be different based on different levels of privilege, different levels of access, but regardless of where we are in terms of what we have access to, we all have a baseline of the expected reality of the world that we live in. And some people may have more abundance in that, and some may have more scarcity, but there are some general baselines that we have expectations for. And when our reality shifts so dramatically and so quickly, it is like psychological whiplash, an emotional whiplash. We don't know actually how to reorient around a world that changes so drastically, which is what happens in crisis. And there is a sense of betrayal. And somebody was floating around, and I added this to the track resource guide materials just this last week, a great article that was talking about nurses and doctors and the impact of trauma long-term over doing the work that folks have to do right now. But it was speaking to the experience of something that's called moral injury. And moral injury is something that was brought into light by a clinician and author named Jonathan Shea, who wrote an amazing set of books called Achilles in Vietnam and Odysseus in America, that was specifically about looking at the experience of war and return in combat veterans. But he looked at this concept, this idea of moral injury, which is more than just, or it has more nuance than just kind of the overarching thing we call trauma. It's about a real fracture or fragmentation of what we believe should be okay. So of our moral understanding of the world. So the way that he describes it when he talks about war and others that, as we talk about it now and sort of the trauma world, is that it's anything that really shifts very often, very quickly, that understanding of how the world should be versus the reality that we're now living into. So in war, that would be the example of, if you're good, good things happen to you. Thou shalt not kill. Things like that are moral tenets that people learn in various ways, culturally, religiously, within society, based on laws and rules and the justice system. And then those things flip very quickly when somebody ends up in a combat situation where terrible things are happening to good people every day, where death and killing become have a different level of permission around it. And then people have to return to a world in which that morality system doesn't function in the larger world, but everything has changed in terms of how they understand. And there's a sense of betrayal, a sense of loss of trust. This is also why it becomes a very existential issue, and people often struggle with what they believe about everything. Because once your moral landscape, the things you believe in to be absolutely true, are so disrupted, it's very hard to know what's real and what's not anymore. Or what can I believe in a world where these kind of things can happen, where the reality that I thought was always like this all of a sudden is not guaranteed to me. So there's this feeling of betrayal. There's a deep feeling of grief around that. And there's this very, very intensive whiplash experience of learning how to live inside a world in which things have so drastically changed. And so in many ways, the world that we've been living into in the last month has incrementally, although now as we move further into the COVID-19 experience, becomes more rapid every day, that the change of the reality is so much different than the world that we were living into before, and that we can't expect that things will be on the shelves, or that we can give someone a hug on, that we know on the street, or that we can get on public transit and feel like we're safe. So there's a sense of violation to what we believed was true. And oftentimes that becomes more subtle, and the things that are more obvious are the responses to that, right? Our inability to sleep, our higher levels of stress, the way we deal with it becomes more obvious. But underlying that is this core shift in the way the world was supposed to work, and the way the world is all of a sudden working in a very different way that doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel safe, and it feels like a real violation of what we think is good and true. So thoughts, reflections, or questions on 2?
One is I serve a community where hugs and other intimate connections has been really the hub of the life of that community, and now that's totally disrupted, and it's almost solely individual contact through phone or at a distance. And so what people have really gained that's healing for their lives is also taken away, where normally we'd be a healing agent in this, and we're disabled in most ways from doing that.
Yes. And also the flip side of that is, depending on the community's sort of accessibility to all these other tools, that not everyone is, right? It's also, there are age barriers, there's access barriers to being able to get virtually connected. The things that are born out of it can be some of these really generative alternative communities. And so some of the positives I've heard particularly are from disability communities that are saying we could never have access to so many things because of physical limitations. And I myself have chronic illness, and so I resonate with that. And now all of a sudden, people are saying all these things that were not open to us before are now accessible because it's the only means for everybody to get connected. And the flip side of that also is, of course, investigating why was it not accessible before to the people it wasn't accessible to. But I think you're right. I think that change in reality that happens so quick, to have to turn on a dime what community means and how you actually are community. I mean, that's why I say it also becomes an existential question, because it asks some very deep questions about how are we community? How do we enact community? And how are we going to do it in this moment, which can be really unnerving and also could be really generative potentially as well. Quentin, I see your hand is up.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Oh, good. You can hear me. As you were, I'm feeling or understanding how, in this moment, how the first and second points actually kind of blend into each other, because as you went toward the second one, I was about to speak, and I was like, oh, okay. And then you sort of extended and sort of moved outward from the center, in a sense, from the first one to the next space or the next circle in a way. I normally don't bring this up actually in any workshop that would even be like this, but there's a film called The Perfect Sense. And the film is based on the idea that there's a virus that creates a world pandemic that before, I believe it causes its end result in terms of leaving you without sanity, is that it gradually takes away every sense perception. Mm. And throughout the film, these two lovers find themselves quarantined. And each couple of weeks or a month or maybe 3 months, each sense perception gets taken away and it changes their relationship. And I'm a meditator, and I started to notice some of the shifts that I was having, in that meditation, sometimes certain types of meditation, as an example, trains you at times to be hyper focused and sensitizes your senses. And so all of a sudden, there are moments where you can't pick or choose, looking at situation with certain biases that you had before, because everything has sort of flipped a little bit. And the idea that you can't touch a person is very much like taking away your sense of touch. The idea you can't even touch objects, except maybe the grass or trees or something like that, it just deprives people of another opportunity to get in contact with themselves and the world around themselves, aesthetically, kinesthetically. And it reminded me of that. There's something therapeutic on the positive aspect of it, but there's also a chance of things having a sense of merging, that everything becomes merged into one action and one point, and that there may be opportunities for people to not diverge their thinking or to separate their thinking into compartmentalizing what they can do, but understanding in this very moment, this one thing for yourself, your partner, or whoever you work with is what you can do, and that may be accepted. There's no the hierarchy of expertise will start to change, maybe, because really all you can do is this, because everyone is so limited, which lends into what you were saying about disability and also the narrative of having your senses removed. I really started to breathe differently. It was like I'm paying more attention to my breathing. I'm getting more upset in situations and less upset in other situations. So my view of who may be a threat is changing. So, and who may be a friend is changing. So these things are happening for me.
Right. I appreciate your the reflection on the senses. And that movie sounds very intense. I don't know if it's watchable for us right now, for folks in this moment. But the phenomenon of that, I think, is really interesting. And you speak to the both and the two parts of it, right? One is that we can feel the deprivation. And we'll talk again when we talk about physical sensitivity. This comes into play, and some other things. But there is deprivation. And in that, there's loss and grief, right, of touch, of our sensory experience of the world. We have to shelter in place. And so, as somebody who lives in a more urban environment, I find the lack of my ability to access nature really, I feel the deprivation very acutely, where in a way I could be home and only walking my dogs for 3 days in a different world, in a 3 months ago world. And it wouldn't feel like this grief and this loss of the thing, because there's also the change of reality often. And in a crisis like this, there's no, there's a lot of things that we cannot know for certain, right? So nobody can say, yes, we have these like increasing deadlines of shelter in place, a national sort of assessment, but we don't have a certain end date, right? So I can't be like, I'm inside for 3 days, but I know I'll see grass on day 4, or I know I'll see grass in 30 days. That isn't a guarantee anymore. So there's a sense of, to what you spoke about, Quinn, heightened sensitivity and awareness to our senses, to the things that we can touch, to the people that we can see, to the environments that we are existing in, to the smell of food. I can't say how many people I've seen doing live videos of them cooking or teaching people how to cook, or it's a moment to learn this new baking tool. So there's also ways in which we're deeply immersing ourselves in sensorial experience. We're in our sort of hyper productive, industrial, speed up your movement, speed up what you produce, US landscape. A lot of us have been conditioned away from the joy and the savoring, right, of our world. So there's an increased, heightened hunger, I think, for savoring our sensory experience. And then there's real grief and loss that also is authentic to, in this new reality, how have I also been deprived, of sensory experience? So how have I been deprived of touch in a way that I didn't realize? Seeing those however many people I see during the week actually had a great impact on my feeling of connection. And the ways in which going for a walk farther than just my block gave me more exposure to sun and to grass and to the smell of nature in a way that, again, I didn't see as vitally important in the same way as I do in this moment. So there's this definite acuteness that also arises. And that acuteness holds both things. It holds pain, anger, loss, suffering, loneliness, and it also holds joy, celebration, grounding, sensory acuteness, awareness of the things that are around us. And again, it goes, all of these things on the list go back to the holding the balance. How do we hold the balance of honoring the parts that feel really hard, and celebrating and honoring the parts that can feel good and generative? And the biggest thing is to not push ourselves. Again, I'm really liking that there are all these articles that are popping up around, do not force yourself to need to be overproductive. In crisis, we are naturally, and I'll get into that in the next few of these, our systems are overtaxed. So the stress of just living in the world is more exhausting than just getting up every day. So not only can we likely not be hyper-productive, or shouldn't push ourselves to be hyper-productive based on where our bodies and our minds are at, but it could be overtaxing. And then we get back to health and embodiment and actually taking care of ourselves. It could be overtaxing to do that, even to the level that we were before. And, I'm deeply honoring of the folks on the front lines that have to do work and can't get rest. But for those of us that have some capacity to build a rhythm, and even folks that have the schedules where they might be working 12-hour shifts, to find something that grounds us. In the last webinar, I also talked about building a rhythm of life, building a schedule of life. So building a way to build some continuity. There are a lot of things uncertain that I can't know, but I can build out when I want to get up every day, right? I was watching, I think it was a Daily Show clip, and they had a few of the hosts on, they're doing video chats instead of the real Daily Show because nobody can be in the studio. But the whole little bit is about them trying to figure out what day of the week it is. Is it Tuesday? It feels like a Saturday. No, it feels like Sunday. And we can lose our sense of where we are, right? And even in that way. And so what does it look like to say, this is the rhythm of my life that I want to hold? Because this I can ground myself in. That I want to have breakfast in the morning, that I'd like to take these 3 vitamins, that I'd like to do a meditation practice every evening. And some folks are even intensifying some of those ways that they're going inward, if they're able, if they have the sort of resources to do that and they don't feel overwhelmed by it, because it's helping to build that rhythm for them in their life that they may not have had before, but that they really desperately long for, again, going back to longing and yearned for in this moment. And then the flip side of that is build a rhythm that works for you and know when to break it is the other piece, is know when you just need a nap, or you just need to binge eat cheese balls that you bought on Amazon.com. That's just a for instance. I'm not going to say that personally, that I bought a case of cheese balls, but I did. So if you need to do that, it's okay. And then don't feel bad that you ate the cheese balls. So finding that balance in this new reality, and also understanding that it's really disorienting and that it can feel like a real violation of the world that we thought we could expect to live into. So number 3 goes into level of feelings. What I mean by that is, and many people have noted this, I've seen people talking about this all over, but I want to help people understand that it's also perfectly natural for this to happen. When we get into a crisis, external crisis experience, our internal body system does react in a kind of trauma response. We are built as creatures like our ancestral lineage of animals in a very primitive way when it comes to fear and real danger. So that's why people talk about fight, flight, freeze, submit as these ways that we respond to danger, because it's also the way that prey animals respond to danger in nature. So this idea that when something is happening that feels like it's danger, our whole body and all of our emotions go into a kind of protective mode. that is very primal, that is very primitive, and that goes back to what is called, sometimes nicknamed, the reptilian brain, which is the oldest part of our brain that doesn't have reasoning and doesn't do logical thinking. It literally just does, what can I do to survive? And in that survival state, everything gets heightened up. Our body responses get heightened and our emotional responses get heightened. And so that's why many people have noted that in this COVID-19 moment, particularly as time goes on, the level of their feelings sometimes feels so out of control. It feels that way inside. It can feel like, oh my God, I feel like an overwhelming sense of joy and celebration to the point that I'm actually weeping. And then I feel so angry and depressed and full of sadness that I'm also weeping. And then in between, I'm feeling these sort of ups and downs that can spike and then calm down, lower, then come up. But that people don't feel like they're on sure footing inside their own feeling state much of the time. And a lot of that also depending on what we're exposing ourselves to. So if we're watching the 24-hour news cycle and we're checking how many human beings have been impacted today based on numbers on a screen that keep growing, we can quickly become overwhelmed by a feeling. At 12 o'clock, the news can be drastically different than it is at 4 o'clock. We have such a rapid shift in that reality that we're living into that our feelings can't almost catch up. And so that's also why finding ways to ground ourselves in the world that we're living in, whether that's finding rituals and practices that help us to slow down, whether that's building a rhythm of life and rituals, is ritual of our day is so important, is also because we're literally being bombarded by new information, changing circumstances, which then change the rhythm of our feelings. In a day, in the world in which we lived in before, unless our entire job was crisis management, and even then, we're only dealing with crises occasionally, not all the time, in any given day, we wouldn't have even one thing, right, that was that level of extreme high, extreme low of feeling. We might have something in a week. Maybe we'll have a few things that will show up and that will feel actually like a lot. If we have a few sort of surprising, unexpected, or disturbing things in a week, that we could feel really overwhelmed by that. But we're actually dealing with that in such a rapid fire way that it could be, depending on what we're exposing ourselves to, every 15 minutes, every hour, every half a day. It's still too much for our system to manage. And so those feelings are moving up and down. And along with all those feelings are the ways that our hormones are responding to those feelings. So we have like adrenaline and cortisol and all of these actual systemic ways that our body produces a response to those feelings. The way that our body is meant to do it to actually prepare us if there is immediate danger so that we can run, right? The adrenaline is so we can bounce out of there, like the deer in the woods. You hear the thing rustling and a deer, adrenaline spikes, their heart races, their breath moves fast, and then they can jet out of there. The problem is we're in a sustained period of crisis, which means we're not responding to a single thing that we need to get away from. And so that up and down of our feelings is also dysregulating or confusing our body, holding us in this hyper state of alert, and not allowing our feelings ever to kind of fully settle and fully ground. And I think this is also why I've seen a lot of folks popping up with community meditation groups that are online. Or I had a friend who reached out to me and said, I'm going to do this 21-day practice series and with prompts every day. And do you want to join the group so we can all do this 21 days of this practice together? What are the ways we also make really deep intentions every day to do something that grounds us? Because there's just too much of this. And all of this is what makes us feel so tired all the time. So thoughts on number 3, level of feelings. Oh, Quentin, I see your hands up again. Or was that from before?
That was from before, but I can speak unless Darren or someone else wanted to speak.
Go ahead.
Oh, what just came up for me was the idea that sort of maybe crystallizes a little bit more about ritual, is that in addition, maybe a ritual is to have a vision, something that even maybe is bigger than the ritual. It's something, because the rituals sometimes the feelings can be so overwhelming that if you're isolated, that maybe there's a motivational sort of ebb and flow that gets lost and you're so exhausted. But sometimes visualizing something that goes beyond, or feeling out to something that goes beyond me having to do anything, trying to connect with something more universal if one has a belief system, and that the rituals can be supportive of that, if the rituals don't include some bigger vision that one can get in collectively or communally, because sometimes rituals can have some ego involved in them. So for me, it would be also an idea to extend beyond that if I can, because nature doesn't particularly have an ego, not particularly. I can sort of go out and still go out and take off my shoes and ground myself with the earth and feel the earth if I want to, and pray or not pray or what have you. But there's a sense of just being rather than doing. And even though sometimes rituals still have that doing quality, but a bigger vision than myself, maybe resting myself in that would be something. But I only thought about that because you're the second person who mentioned the ritual being an anchor to help bring me back. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think again, everything goes back to both and, right? As giving ourselves permission for what works for us in a moment, right? And rituals can mean 1,000 things. So for some, it may be grounding. For some, like you said, it's there's too much going on, depending on what the practices are. And I would say the same goes for this description that you're giving of being able to ground in something that's larger than ourselves, in some sort of state of being that's beyond this experience, is that can be good for some people. And that can be also really disorienting for other people. People that are really feeling like they're in a state of crisis, or in a place where they're deeply experiencing their traumatic response, the anxiety is super heightened, trying to find something that can seem abstract can actually be really hard. And so sometimes people need something as simple as, I can feel the table, I can feel the chair. So there's such a wide scope to how we hold ourselves and how we find grounding. And that's dependent to each person. And that's dependent even on the day and the hour for us individually, what that looks like. So when anxiety and stress feels really high, something that's very simple and tangible can be really useful. And sometimes also we can think more abstractly, but thinking beyond into something that might be the universe or very broad, while it can hold space for some people, my one caution is when we're feeling acute distress in a particular moment, it can actually create the opposite effect. It can be really ungrounding for people, and they might need something as simple as remembering to breathe, or touching something to know that going back to the sensory at a real basic level, this is the chair, this is the floor, I am existing in the world right now, when it gets to more of a panic. So yes, I appreciate that. And it's a very both and proposition as well.
Earlier, well, I guess it was last week, I was in on a briefing for critical incident processing, and what was brought up there was adrenaline and cortisol taking about 3 days to subside. But then if it's a chronic situation, are we just kind of overproducing those things continuously?
Yes, and in a longer term stream, that's usually, I mean, not to medicalize things too much, but what people describe as post-traumatic stress disorders, I really just call the trauma response stuck with the on switch on all the time. So all those ways in which we're meant to respond to danger and all those levels of hormones being risen are meant to be immediate and are meant to be short term. And so when we get stuck in that place, that's when we may not be in our most heightened adrenaline all the time, but we're bouncing back into it all the time, which is why people who have traumatic stress that get stuck often feel exhausted all the time, often feel like their emotions are up and down all the time, because that switch that that we turn off after, say, a single incident or moment of stress. So I get robbed, right? I get held up at gunpoint. I'm feeling all those things, but I can come down much faster because the danger removes itself very quickly. And particularly if I get help, like critical incident debriefing is an example of a kind of therapeutic practice that's meant to help people process out that sort of response so that it doesn't get stuck, because it's not a guarantee it won't get stuck. Even if it was just a single incident, it's less likely, and it's even less likely if I get something like a critical incident response, or I get some way to process those, not just feelings, but literally the sensory experience very soon after. In the state that we're in now, it's more like being in a combat zone on the front lines and not coming back, right? Not coming back to home base, or not returning back home to the safe zone, because you can see, and because I've done a lot of study and practice with combat veterans in my career, it is very different to treat somebody who's in a war zone at the time and to try to help treat somebody's symptoms or stress level when they're removed from it, because also there are real dangers, right? We can't, you couldn't say to somebody, it is totally irrational for you to clean your hands 5 times a day. Let's talk about how it's not rational and logical, and let's stop it, while you're on the front lines, because you need to clean your hands 5 times a day at least. But how do we find a way to balance the stress so you can actually have moments where you feel like you can bring those hormone levels down, those stress levels down, to find a more neutral emotional state, at least periodically, so that we don't get stuck up there. So we don't get stuck with the on switch on. But helping people regulate and deal with that is going to look very different when we're still in the midst of it than when somebody's behind the lines, and say a year from now, we can say, you don't need to be this cautious because the world has changed again, but we're not in that reality yet. So we have to manage it instead of try to change all of the things we're doing, because many of them are necessary. But yeah, I think it's very important, is that being in this sustained place has a very different impact on our stress systems. And that's actually, I'll get into, 4, 5, and 6, and going into 7 actually are all gonna get us further into how that hyper response system shows up in different ways. So 4 is about memories and dreams. And I wanna speak about them distinctly. So a little bit, again, on last week's webinar, I talked about memories resurfacing. And I've seen some articles and essays and things where folks are talking about that a little in some reporting and stuff, talking about the impact of past trauma in the present moment, or past stress in the present moment. Memories can resurface from stress in times of stress. So an example I often talk about is that when 9/11 occurred, all around the country, sexual assault hotlines were overwhelmed with victims from 10, 20, 30 years ago calling in. Some who hadn't remembered at all that they'd had experiences of violation, they totally blocked it, and that's a self-protective mechanism of our brain oftentimes. And some who had just thought they dealt with it and hadn't. And the reason why is because when those systems in our body get turned on and tell us that the danger is happening, it also recharges the parts of our brain that remember when I felt like that before, when I had that experience before, some that are conscious and some that are subconscious. And we may have memories of things that we thought long forgotten, everything from trauma, as well as grief and loss, right? The death of somebody that we thought we processed and had wept all our tears for could feel very real again. Loss, a pain, a trauma, all kinds of things. So also just to say that that's a common experience, that those things might show up. And I've been really reassured by so many virtual spaces that have popped up for people to just be in conversation, be in community, talk about what they're feeling stressed about. Now, for some folks, these memories will be big and they may need to get some further assistance, getting mental health therapy. Again, something that almost everybody I know has converted their practice online, so is really available to people right now. But just know that that can happen. that the bad experiences that triggered our stress response before in life could pop up all of a sudden, and really surprise us, could really freak us out. And it's actually a very, very common thing to happen in crisis. And so I just kind of want to say that to folks, and also to say, be gentle with yourself around that. So be gentle with yourself about not judging yourself. Oh, I thought I dealt with that. I thought that was in the past. It's not. There's a reason it's getting disrupted again, and it's a state of crisis. And also be gentle with yourself in the sense that, going back to that slowing down, this moment may be much less about productivity if you're being bombarded with old pain. And it may be much more about just allowing yourself ways to be gentle. So a long bath, moments of stretching and breathing, going back again to some of those simple grounding practices, like being aware of where you are or being able to connect to your senses. Those things might need to take priority over other things, and that also might mean that there might be some dust on the floor, and you'll notice it even more because you're in your house all the time. But giving ourselves permission to let go of things that are not serving us, or that we don't have capacity for, because we may be overwhelmed with more things coming to the surface that we thought were gone. And dreams are tied to that. And again, this is something I've seen a lot of people talking about. Oh, I have these wild dreams. I've been having these, I never even remember my dreams. And all of a sudden I wake up, I can remember them all the time. The example that I've been giving is that, and this is true to me, I keep having these dreams, these very vivid dreams, where I'm doing regular daily life. One, I was at a party with a bunch of friends. Another one, I was in a supermarket and I was at the salad bar. And all of a sudden I realized, halfway through these banal things happening, that there's a pandemic and I shouldn't be at the grocery store. I definitely shouldn't be at the salad bar, shouldn't be at this party. Do I tell everybody to leave? And everyone's acting normal, like it's fine. And so it's this sort of pressing in of the reality that my brain is holding on to so strongly because it's so vivid all throughout my day, which is COVID-19 and pandemic. And then my dream state, which is just trying to have a basic dream about a party, or a basic dream about I'm at the grocery store. And this consciousness, the high stress consciousness, is poking into my dreams and bringing forward the things that I don't have as much control over in my sleep, like my anxiety, like my fear, like my panic. And oftentimes that's where those feelings can play themselves out. Sometimes we can keep them at bay when we're awake because we're kind of at the steering wheel of our thoughts to a certain extent. But for a lot of people, we'll get bombarded by all of that when we go to sleep. Which is also when I talk to people about building their rituals and their rhythm of life, I really try to remind folks also to set a bedtime ritual that gives them a lot of space at the end of the day to decompress. And this is true. I did that when I was a therapist with combat veterans. I've done that with my counseling and support of folks in social movements. It applies actually across these three spheres specifically, very similar, is that we can bombard ourselves with what's happening and what's happening next. And especially at the end of the day, if you are watching news the last hour before you go to bed, those dreams are going to be way up in the panic zone. If you're, on social media talking to everyone else who's talking about how they're feeling today about it the last hour before you go to bed, also, your stress is going to be right at the surface. Those feelings are going to be right at the surface. And so I really ask people to be just more attentive to how you spend that last hour or so before bed. Build out a ritual that gives you some separation from all the other things that are going on. And ideally can also input something that helps to soothe you, to ground you, to calm you. I have a lavender bed spray, and I like to listen to this meditation sort of background sound. It helps my brain to kind of slow down before bed. But whatever those things are for you, be extra attentive, particularly to that first hour, that last hour before bed, as well as the early morning hours too. So if you're distressed in bed, you also can wake up feeling really frazzled and not feeling, because our change in reality is so drastic, like you're ready to go and you can just go right into your routine. So give yourself some gentleness also in the morning to do the things that are going to help you ground the most. I was talking to my mom on the phone the other day, and she said, every morning I wake up and right away I think it's a normal day. And then 3 seconds in, I'm like, oh crap, pandemic, And so our brains are readjusting to our perceived reality is meeting up with our actual reality, sometimes on a daily basis. So giving ourselves, again, this spaciousness is really important, and knowing those memories and dreams are going to be really vivid, because our stress response is up in that high sort of octane space. So all of our feelings will be stronger. It will also ignite and bring forward memories that are stronger. And our dream landscape will become much more alive with all the stuff that our subconscious is sort of wrestling with during the day, but possibly trying to push down, and then will kind of pop up while we're sleeping. So any thoughts on that one before we move to number 5? All right, I'm going to move to number 5. Number 4, memories and dreams, move into 5, which is stress, and then very much into energy, which is 6. And so these may be a little bit more condensed because we've kind of been building into them. As Quentin mentioned earlier, I kind of tried to make them a flow so one makes sense after the other. But stress I've already spoken about, specifically around the stress hormones that we experience in this moment, and that sort of life or death animal response that gets turned on high, and how much it can tax us. And really, again, the thing that I'm just going to reiterate around stress, because it's really shown up throughout, is finding the ways to get your balance, to bring those stress levels down in your body. Maybe doing deep breaths for a few times a day can be as simple as that. Whether you have specific practices that you have access to that help calm you and soothe you, or finding new community or existing community that can hold space to keep us both accountable and keep us in relationship through finding those places and spaces in our day. Like I said, I've seen some really amazing things with communities building spaces out of literally nowhere, right? Out of the virtual ether, that are holding people in so many different ways, in so many different places. And there's a bizarre increase in accessibility. I was sending an email to one of my communities I'm involved in, and I said, it's just amazing what we all of a sudden have access to. The other day, Debbie Allen was giving dance lessons, one of the most amazing dancers. And the fact that we have access to a live session with a DJ who often does these really sort of private parties, and the fact that we can, that all these storytellers, all these kids, storybook writers are reading their books live on TV, online, and teaching kids how to paint online things. So there's also an expansiveness to how we can build these things into us to moderate our stress. And if we allow it, there's some expansiveness in our life schedule to give us more space to do it. But it also goes back to building that rhythm of life, because I think if we don't build some kind of schedule in our day, it can feel like overload. Like, what do I do next? There's 7,000 groups now for this one thing. There's 3,000 groups over here. And to your point, Darren, and what do I do with the community that grounded me before? So also, let's find the rhythm in our life. Let's find the things we can add into that most serve us, virtually or in connection to people that we already know, in our house or in our community, and understand that we are all at a heightened level of stress, that this is a global experience that is happening simultaneous, which is very, very unique, that we are all in a state of crisis, that all of our hormone levels and stress levels are increased. And also, as a result, be gentle with ourselves, but be gentle with the people in our lives too, right? So the people we love could be shorter with us, could be more angry, could be feeling deep sadness that can sometimes feel overwhelming, that we don't know how to hold. But just giving space for folks to have their own feelings, to give ourselves room to pause and have patience with the people that we love and care about, to know that they are also going through that same sort of panic and stress response in mind and body and spirit. I'm going to move to number 6 because I want to make sure to get through all these. So I may move through a few of these more quickly. As I said, they build on each other. So 6 is energy. And this goes back to I would say the critical piece of this that I want to note is leave room for sleep and plenty of it. So imagining the fact that our stress response, our adrenal gland, our cortisol, those things that actually pump us full and pump us up ready to, run away from danger, are coming and going at rapid rates and high peaks in our body at any given point in time. That exhausts our physical body system. Pumping so much of that out in any given day, especially in this up and down frenetic way, exhausts our body. So if you wake up feeling tired, if you feel like your body needs a nap by noon, if you're exhausted by 8 p.m., that's a natural response of your body trying to restore the energy that gets zapped at a much faster level when our stress responses are stuck on high all day long or good chunks of the day, throughout the day, over a longer course of time. So sleep is critical in this moment. Having those rituals before bed is a great way to allow us to have a more peaceful, sort of calmer sleep, but also we may need a nap at 2 p.m. And you may never have had a nap at 2 p.m. before in your life. And all of a sudden by 2 p.m. you feel like you're dragging and you can't even think any longer. And particularly, speaking to folks that are doing really high stress work right now. I mean, everything from folks that are doing telemental health, who may not be in a physical front line, but are dealing with people's crisis all day, and folks that are in spiritual care that are doing that, to folks that are physically on the front lines from driving Uber, delivering people food, working at the grocery store, doctors and nurses and medical personnel that are out. That's going to be times 1,000, right? Because their stress response is also going to be alerted more intensively in the states of actual crisis, the moments of actual crisis, particularly with first responders. And then those folks even that are doing, Uber driving are worried about, can they afford to survive given what they're making? And they have to risk their life just to make the small amounts that they can right now. So naps, I would say. It's all about naps in this moment, and rest, whatever that looks like, right? So rest may not be a full nap, but it might be pausing from your day to, if you have a house, going in the sun and being in a garden, maybe walking around the block at a safe distance from everyone else, while also being kindly to them, because we don't, we can still be kindly. It may be taking that bath in the middle of the day, even though it feels like, why would I do that? I never do that. But our rhythm of life needs to accommodate our level of energy. And our level of energy is going to be consistently depleted throughout this time period. So we have to find something that is functional for us, and also reinforce that for the folks in our lives. Again, the folks that are feeling their stress, feeling their taxing, feeling their overwhelm, leaving that permission open, not just for us, but those that we love, to pause, to take breaks, to have rest, and that it literally is our body overtaxed. Our energy is depleted more than it would be before. It doesn't just feel like that. That's really what being stuck in stress does to us. Quentin, I see you noted your mother texted you with a bad dream. No coincidence, about sister just 3 minutes ago. Yeah, so, and the reason also I'm doing this webinar is because, and it'll be recorded and then can be posted, is because I was seeing so much repetition of people having a lot of these experiences and being worried about it. Like, why am I having these vivid dreams? Why are these memories coming up? Why am I feeling so tired all the time? So a lot of it is just to say that this is actually what our bodies are doing, what our minds are doing in this moment, that all of these are actually the natural response to these things. And that's why we're feeling that way. So moving to 7, again, so I can stay in my time bracket, which I'm always terrible about, is a physical hypersensitivity. And the reason that is important, or I wanted to highlight it as a specific thing, is because the nature of our specific crisis is about illness, right? It's about sickness, it's about illness, it's about a virus. And as a result, we're going to be extra aware of our body. Now, part of that is the stress response, because it makes our whole system more hyper aware, and so we're just more hyper aware in general. But there's a very specific kind of physicality to this current crisis and this current state of stress that is all about bodies. It's all about what we feel in our bodies. What is somebody else feeling in their bodies? What is somebody else doing with their bodies? Did that person just touch the front gate of my apartment building? Now do I need a handy wipe? It's all about embodiment, but not an embodiment on the face of it that is necessarily healing for us. It's an embodiment that is panic inducing, right? And in another reality, in a 4 months ago reality, that level of response we would say was compulsive, right? But it's not in this moment. There's reasons why we have to do it. But as a result, our awareness of our body is one that often is inducing panic instead of inducing relaxation or just regular awareness. So the practice we did at the beginning of this session was really intentional around awareness, because I wanted a way to just notice what we're feeling in our body without judgment, without trying to change it, and then relax it a little. I think embodied practices like that can be really helpful right now, because a lot of what we're holding in our bodies is the stress about, am I sick? Is that a symptom? I just sneezed. Let me look that up online and see if it's a symptom. I have a headache this morning. The other day I woke up with a headache, and I have some asthma and stuff. So I woke up with a headache, sinus pressure, and some breathing issues. And it's springtime. So actually that's super normal for me, right? That is what my body does when spring shows up. But there was that flicker of that moment, right? Where I thought, oh no, that's 3 of the symptoms. And I had to talk myself down and be like, those would be 3 of the symptoms if you didn't have asthma and chronic sinus problems. And by the way, you also wake up with a sinus headache every day for the last 5 years of your life. So that's actually perfectly normal for you. But I can laugh at myself, but I know that's, because I've heard so many people, that's what we're doing. We're really hyper aware of our bodies in this moment, but in a way that can be all consuming, and that can actually defeat our own wellness, right? Because if we're extra stressed about it, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that if we're extra stressed about our body, those stress hormones stress out our body, which can make headaches worse, can make the inflammation in our body worse, to make our sinuses feel worse. It can do all kinds of things to actually change the mechanics of how we're feeling, which then in the cycle will make us think maybe even more so that we're sick. So it's important in this moment to be aware of our bodies, understand that we're going to be more sensitive to what's going on in our bodies, and also to have sometimes internal monologue with ourselves and sometimes external conversations with other people that can sort of mirror back to us, that's not a symptom, or it's unlikely that that's a symptom, so having checks and balances for ourselves with the reality of what really is my body, what really does go on with my body, the ways I need to be safe for it and with it, and the ways in which it can go so far that I actually can do more harm than good to myself. And the flip side of that hypersensitivity, though, is that actually I think there are ways in which it's making people more attuned to what their body needs. So I described in the beginning, I postponed the Monday night session and made it tonight because my body wasn't feeling well. And I knew I needed to keep it as healthy as I could. And I would say 3 weeks ago, I would have pushed myself and I would have said, nope, that's what you're supposed to do. That's the thing that you said you were doing tonight. And so it doesn't matter what your body feels like. So the reverse of that, though, is I was more sensitive to what my body needed. And I gave myself permission to do it. And I wouldn't have necessarily done that a month ago. So there are ways it can serve our body and ways that it can actually help us to take care of ourselves better. Maybe we have more time at home to pay attention to what we're eating and to cook foods that take longer but are better for us, or take time to stretch and move in ways that we wouldn't necessarily be doing if we weren't in this particular world and landscape that we're in right now. So like all these other ones, it's both and, right? It can go extreme, but it also can be a way to balance us out in a way that we might not have been, say, a month ago. And again, I'm going to push forward through these last few and then just kind of open it up for any final questions and thoughts. So number 8, I was just joking with somebody about this today. So it was time and experience of time. I don't know about any of you, but going back also to the Daily Show clip where they said, is it Tuesday? No, it's Sunday. No, it must be Monday. There's a distortion, both feeling like things are very fast and super slow all at the same time. In this particular crisis moment, in this particular world that we're living into, it's very particular around the smallness of our physical landscape, right? Our world is as big as whatever place we reside in for the most part, besides walking the dog, around the block or something, or going into a backyard if you have it. Our world is very small physically. And as a result, and our days don't necessarily look different they're not broken up in the same way they were before. Folks that work 9 to 5, whose work is now on hiatus or furloughed or work from home, a Monday can look like a Sunday all of a sudden. Now, some of us that have done some work from home previously have some ability to navigate the sort of change of time and relevance of time. But even within the folks that have done some of that, there's still something very specific about this moment because you were still going out in the world to, say, meet up with a friend on a Friday night or have a particular family dinner on one night. But now everybody is either all close together if you're living with family, or all totally separated if you're living distant from folks. So what a day looks like, how long a day is, also kind of like an accordion, ebbs and flows. So the joke I was saying with a colleague today was that it both feels like I have no time to get anything done, and that goes back to some of our own perception of the world and the speed that we're functioning at. So some of those stress hormones can slow us down so that we feel like, oh my God, a whole day went by and I feel like I did half the things I thought I was going to do. Well, some of that is related to our stress and how much it's sort of slowing us down and the overwhelm of the moment. And then in other ways, it can feel like the time is so slow. Like, oh my God, has it been a week since last Wednesday? It feels like a year because so much also has happened in that time. So much in the world, so much in the country. So there's this weird accordion thing that happens with time where it feels like sometimes in your lived experience, there's not enough. And then with so much happening at once, it can also feel like, oh my God, last week was a year ago. So that in and out of time and this sort of distortion of what we see as, oh, this is what a day's like, or this is what a Tuesday's like, no longer feels like a Tuesday. Feels like any other day in 7 days in the week, potentially. So sleep cycles. So I wanted to speak to that again. It goes a little bit, that's number 9. A little bit goes into memories and dreams. But just speaking to sleeplessness, specifically sleeping to sleeplessness and insomnia. Now, the other end of that is sleeping a lot. So again, that lack of rhythm in our day and the feeling like we're overwhelmed sometimes can lead us to sleeping a lot. And sometimes also depression and sadness can lead us to sleeping a lot. And on the others, and so I've heard some folks feeling like that, like they're just exhausted all the time and it's hard to get motivated. And then on the other side of, and potentially that is not how they are like most of the time. And the other side of that, a lot of people I've been hearing as well about insomnia. So not being able to fall asleep. Now, again, remember the stress hormones are pumped up. So what is the opposite of extremely alert and ready to run from danger would be sleep. It's the most relaxed you can be. It's a state of everything's okay enough that I can actually go to sleep and nothing bad's going to happen. So even if we're not consciously thinking at the end of the day, oh my God, if I go to sleep, something bad's going to happen, that stress response kind of is giving us that message in our body that it's not safe to sleep because it's sending us the signal that we need to be ready to run at a very biological level. So a lot of people are experiencing insomnia where they may not have before, or they may have just in random moments or in moments of stress. But just to say again, that's a natural response because our body is in this higher stress place. And so that's when it becomes also really important to build out that hour or so before sleep, especially if you're experiencing insomnia, as well as if you're experiencing disturbing dreams, is because your body needs so much reinforcement and your mind needs so much reinforcement at this moment to say it's okay. Really, at a biological level, it's convincing your body it's okay to sleep. You're not going to be in danger right now. Because in that reptilian brain, which is our oldest brain, it doesn't speak to reason, right? It doesn't understand logic and reason. It doesn't understand what our more advanced part of our brain understands, which is, oh, of course, I'll be fine for 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever, because I'm actually not in immediate danger tonight. It doesn't know how to read the difference between I feel in danger and I am in danger. So we have to kind of reprogram the body at the end of the day to get to a place where it at least can feel like it's going to be safe enough overnight to get to sleep. So insomnia is a real common thing that folks are experiencing now. And the opposite of that as well, feeling really groggy, feeling lethargic, feeling tired often because those hormones are kind of using up our energy. Jade, you said the content being presented here is so on point, so relevant and calming to hear so many specific experiences be shared. I really appreciate hearing that, because that was my hope of this, is that at least we don't have enough time to go super in detail, right, to everything, but I wanted to kind of go through some of the big things that I noticed people were talking about the most and that are most common in a crisis state, in a stress state. So we can be like, oh, we're all in it, right? And we all got to figure this out. And it's a very unique experience because we're in a global collective moment where we're in this sustained period of stress that is very specific and also includes this kind of level of isolation that also doesn't allow us to access a lot of the supports the same way we would if it was any other kind of crisis, even if it was sustained, where we could go out in the world and we could get more of the tools and resources we need the way we would otherwise. So we're also having to reinvent how we manage it while dealing with it at the same time. And then number 10, I wanted to sort of end on one that doesn't have a lot of heaviness to it, or maybe it does, but not bad heaviness. Number 10 is appreciation. So that goes all the way back to our change in perception, to number 1, is that the world that we live in and how we see it the landscape is different. So while 3 weeks ago, I would have just assumed there'd be bread on the shelves if I needed it, or eggs available, which I keep having trouble getting eggs. And I had no idea how much I loved eggs until I couldn't get eggs. But it gives then an appreciation for things, for people, for experiences, right? I had no idea how much I just was given so much life by having the availability of eggs. And so now when I can get eggs, finally, I get really excited about having eggs for breakfast. Becomes a whole piece of my ritual that I find joy from. And the same way in which our level of appreciation around, underpaid minimum wage service workers who work their butt off 365 days a year for ages, how so many of us are seeing them visibilized in a different way. Those people are bringing life-sustaining resources to folks that can't leave their house. Those are people risking their lives to make sure somebody gets the Uber to get to work to do that frontline job. So it also it challenges the things that we expected. It challenges our old normal in a way that also is good for us, in a way that asks us to stretch what we care about, what we appreciate, what we want to be generous towards, because those things that we expected to be true about the world are not true in this moment. And there are people and there are things that we can appreciate in a whole new way, specific to this moment, that allows us to put a spotlight on everything as simple and totally mundane as I love eggs, to something as great as minimum wage workers and gig workers deserve so much respect for the work they do every day. And thank God they're still doing that work right now for still underpaid wages, so that the rest of us can survive and potentially stay virus-free. That's huge. So I just wanted to close with appreciation because I felt like that was important. And Darren, you said, here's some appreciation. Oh, thank you. I feel uncomfortable reading that aloud, but you said a nice thing. It was a very kind comment. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I know we're out of time, but if anybody has a small or a short closing question or reflection that you want to chat or you want to speak out loud before we close out, I'll leave just a moment for that.
I didn't know if one of the upcoming sessions might talk about like self-medication or other forms of coping that right on a spectrum of things that may or may not be helpful.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many things we can talk about, right? There's so many components of this. And yeah, there's a number of things I would like us to be able to get into in more detail. What I would say is if you have suggestions for upcoming topics, also make sure to put those in the chat box, or you can, if you have follow-up questions, I'm going to put the email address for Track for Movements, which is just track for the number 4 movements at gmail.com for any follow-up questions, reflections. And then also you can come to the Track for Movements website and go to the COVID care page. And that will also continue to update on new programming, webinars that are coming up. Just a reminder, we have the virtual one-on-one care that we're doing. So if folks that you know need access to somebody to check in with, we have a team of almost 30 folks now that are willing and able to volunteer to support folks that just want somebody to give them a call or have a video chat and be able to check in with them a few times to kind of, as a bridge between somebody that maybe needs more services than that. We can always help people find those, but just as a bridge from loneliness, from overwhelm, just to be sat with. So yes, so Darren, you asked about the first recording. So yes, there was a first session. If you go to the COVID care page on the Track for Movements website, the recording is already up there for the first one. And then this one will be added, and any subsequent one will continue to add to the website, as well as to the Track resources Google document, which is also on the Track website. That is like a running list of not just stuff that we're doing, but stuff that we found that other people are doing, articles, resources for therapy, all kinds of other things that we also have listed up there. Yeah, and the Track resource guide is on the website, all in that COVID care page. So there's a COVID care page that's dedicated to all of this. It will have previous recordings, upcoming webinar information. It will have the one-on-one virtual support request form. It has the link to the Track resource guide, all of it. All right, so I cannot believe it. We're pretty much on time. I never do that. Well, I try really hard, but I get very excited about information and sharing information. I really genuinely believe that the knowledge that we have, particularly when it comes to things that are scary like trauma and stress, is so important and can be so empowering and can give us at least a launching pad to know where to go and what to do and what's okay. So thank you all for being here. For those folks that were not with us, again, this recording will be available up on the Track for Movements website on the COVID care page, along with all of our other care resources. And you can also see the bios for our amazing Track team there. I also have a trauma course that I'm doing. It's going to be a 4-week intensive online trauma course that's starting, I think it opened today, but the content starts on Monday. So if that's something you're interested or somebody you know is, that also the link to register for that is also on the Track website on the COVID care page. So thank you everyone. As you get closer to your bedtime tonight, just be aware that maybe there are things that I talked about during this that could stir stuff up. You never know. When we talk about stress or trauma, it can also bring some of those sensations more present in our bodies. So just take care of yourself, take care of your body, pay attention to what you need in any given moment. And hopefully I'll see you back again soon when we do another one of these gatherings.
Thanks very much.